YouTube, Dawson Ryder here with today's episode of Power Rangers Dino Fury. The Morphin Masters have been brought up again, so I thought I would make a quick little video explaining some basic ideas of what we know about them so far. So in Dino Fury, we got the first real on-screen look at them in quite some time, at least in their more modern form. And all we really know about them from Dino Fury Episode 1 is that the 6 beings look like they came out of the morphing grid to give the Dino Fury Rangers their powers, and they're connected to the morphing grid. And that's all we know about them from Dino Fury, but their appearance is very similar to what we see in the comics, which I'll get to in a minute. But as I mentioned in the review for this week's episode, I remember them being mentioned in Mighty Morphin. I couldn't remember when, but I looked it up, and apparently it was Season 1, Episode 7, when they were just kind of vaguely mentioned as like these wizards that got rid of the power eggs. And back then, a lot of times in Season 1, they would include these vague terms and big terms of things just for the sake of the script. You know, I don't think there was any intention by it or any intention for big lore. There was a handful of things like that, especially in the first season, where it seemed like there was a larger story there, but it was just kind of there to have some kind of name and vague backstory in the script. So there was really nothing done with them beyond that. But in the comics, we have gotten a little bit more, especially in the Beyond the Grid story. There's been some general mentions of them in the comics in general. And they're usually represented by these characters called emissaries, and there's 3 of them, and they're red, blue, and yellow, and their appearances shift between the various Rangers throughout history of that color, and they sort of essentially speak for them. And the Morphin Masters were kind of kept at a distance from us until Beyond the Grid, when we actually got to meet one and get to know a little bit about one. There was a bit in Shattered Grid, which I'll get to in a second. But they are effectively some of the first beings to discover the morphing grid. They believe they are the first beings, and have been studying it for a long time. And unless I'm, misreading it, I don't think that they're necessarily official guardians of the grid. They're kind of more like self-appointed guardians of the grid. They're just Morphin Masters because they've mastered it, because they've been studying it so long. They have an increased knowledge and connection with it, and will make various decisions for the well-being of the grid and the universe in general. And that's seen in Beyond the Grid. Some spoilers from Beyond the Grid. There's a storyline about how one of the Morphin Masters cut himself off in a pocket universe because they found a planet made of Zeocrystal in order to protect somebody from getting their hands on it that could have been evil because of all the Morphin Grid potential. He used his Solar Rangers to cut that part of the universe off in a pocket dimension, and that's kind of an example of like a decision the Morphin Masters would make, even though it's controversial for that universe, for the sake of the grid and the universe. That's essentially what they are. They're kind of like really well self-taught Morphin Masters, and they kind of oversee the grid. Now, we did get our first more close look at them during Shattered Grid, actually, because Draken's whole point was to get inside the grid. He went inside the grid and he got something called the Heart of the Master. It was like this jewel on this Morphin Master's body that allowed him to shape reality, and that was our first real look at it before we got to see them in Beyond the Grid. And you can see from the pictures that the design for the Morphin Masters we see in Beyond the Grid and in the comics is kind of close to the Dino Fury one. There's definitely some differences, but there's also some similarities, like with the hair look and the visor, kind of almost like a Batman-seeming visor, and the cape. But like the Morphing Masters in the comics all seem to be dressed roughly the same, whereas they're color-coded in Dino Fury based off of the color of the Dino Fury Rangers, red, blue, pink, black, gold, green. So these, I'm not sure how much they thought about that when they made these. Based on how similar they are, I feel like they had to have looked at a picture to try to make it sort of similar. I'm not expecting an enormous amount of attempts to make these really connected between the comics and the TV show. I'm definitely excited to hopefully learn more about them in the Dino Fury continuity and what they did for the Dino Fury powers for sure, but I don't think there's going to be any main attempts made to tie these together. But, for the sake of my own headcanon right now, I do consider them all to be the same people. In the comics, the Morphin Master said there's only one grid, even though there's multiple universes, so I imagine they oversee the grid for all the universes, and, I can easily have them be the same people in my head. I don't really have a problem with them slightly changing costumes, even the ones from Mighty Morphin, even though they look very different in that little flashback or whatever. Those could have been the early versions of them. But that's what I wanted to make a little video about. If we get any more major updates, of course, I won't talk about it in future videos. But until next time, like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you can get my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.